So as I drive and then hike this canyon, the Merced River Canyon, I can't help but wonder what the surveyors and then even the engineers must have thought when they first walked into the canyon and kind of laid eyes on what they were up against. We are maybe a half mile downstream or west of Briceburg, and you can see the sheer rock walls. And as we move upstream, closer to the eastern terminus of the railroad, which would be at El Portal, the canyon continues to just get more and more narrow. And so obviously they were able to overcome those challenges because ultimately we had a railroad that operated for, close to 40 years. But even though the surveyors and engineers were able to, if you want to call it, conquer the canyon and lay rails all the way to El Portal, there was one thing that they were not able to prevent. And that one thing would haunt the YV throughout its operation. And we're going to see a little evidence of that today. So let's get started. All right, so where we're standing it's significant because, as you can see there, that's the 1926 bridge. Again, that was once called the All-Weather Highway, but when the United States decided to go to the numbered highway system throughout the U.S., this became California Highway 140. The YV, throughout its lifetime, experienced a lot of flooding. The biggest one that I've read about is in 1937, which did considerable damage. This bridge right here, and many like it in the Merced River Canyon, were actually still intact until we had another flood exactly 60 years later in 1997. I remember that was what they called the 100-year flood. And that's what took this out, and apparently what few other remaining bridges there were that took them out as well. And this is what we have remaining. Okay, so we've moved a few miles upstream towards El Portal. We're now at a place called Jenkins Hill, which that is that hill right there in front of you. First, for the fun fact, up on the side of this hill here, there is an old horse trail that actually predates the YV. And that horse trail was roughly about 24 miles long, went all the way to Coulterville, which the miners that were working in the canyon here, that's where they had to go for supplies prior to the YV building rails through here in 1907. Also up on this hillside, there's a spring, or at least used to be a spring during the operation of the YV, which is why they built or installed 2 water tanks. From the photos, I'm thinking if you look at this little point right here, your springs would have been right in this little notch right here. Sorry, not the springs, but I mean the water tanks. Would have been right in here. Of course, that's totally obscured by trees right now. Now those water tanks would be taken out of service about 1930 because just upstream from where we're at, which will be there in a moment, is a site called Emory. And when they built the quarry at Emory, the YV installed a water tank there and pulled these out again in 1930, which they would be put back into service in 1937. And we're getting back to that 1937 flood again. The tank at Emory would be washed out, and instead of rebuilding that right away, they would actually just reopen this one here, which didn't get washed away, and put these back into service. All right, here's a good example of just how vulnerable the YV roadbed was to flooding. Look how close, well, you can see it right there, but it ends abruptly here on this bend. Look how close it is to the water. And we're at low water right now. Totally scrubbed clean right there, which is curious that the water tanks were not washed out in 1937 because, again, they were right in there, right in that tree line. All right, so we've literally just come around the corner here in the canyon, and we've arrived at Emory. And Emory's story begins with the discovery of limestone right up on that ridge there. And that was about the early 1920s. Now the Yosemite Portland Cement Company, which was opened in 1925 down in Merced, they were very interested in Emory because they could use that limestone in the production of their cement. And at the end of production, which was about 1944, approximately 60,000 loads or hopper cars of limestone had been pulled from Emory and taken down the YV into Merced. And very few buildings actually even remain here at Emory. In fact, none of the railroad buildings exist anymore. There are a few things here I'll point out to you that remain from the quarry operation. Now up on the hill there, if you can see it pretty much in the center of your screen, that is the side of the quarry itself, but that building you see, that's actually the crusher. So the quarry would be pulled out from the mine. Actually, I'm sorry, that's a storage bin, which actually is, there was a crusher up there as well, but that's actually the storage bin. So the ore would be crushed, the limestone would be crushed, put into that storage bin, and then right in the middle of your frame, I'm going to take us right down the mountain. You can see that small cut. That is the incline, where they would lower that ore down to this area over here, which had a really large storage bunker. And that storage bunker is where they would load the YV hopper cars for their journey back to Merced. And by the way, for those who are curious about such things, including myself, That storage bin up there on the mountain is about 9/10 of a mile away and about 800 feet elevation above us. They would haul about 24 hoppers per load. The limitation on that was not so much the capacity of the engine, from what I've read. It was simply that the siding here at Emory was only long enough to accommodate 24 hoppers. Now, earlier I mentioned there was a water tank installed here at Emory in 1930. And from what I've been able to figure out, that should be the foundation for it, or at least the footing for it right there, right in the middle of your screen. Now, getting back to our dorms, there were two here. And again, let's remember that back in the days of the operation of the YV, this area would have been considerably more remote than it is today. All right, the dorm on the left would be right up in that area there on top of that wall. I'll show you a photo from back in the day of the Emory operation so you get an exact idea where it's at. And the other dorm would be off to the right over here. Kind of see that old pale tree there, and then there's like a little concrete retaining wall behind it. It would be right there in front of that. Now, unfortunately, these two dormitories are no longer with us. The one on the left was destroyed in the fire in 2003, and the one on the right was destroyed much more recently in the 2018 Ferguson fire. All right, so back during the operation of the YV, there were two ways to get to Emory. One was the railroad itself. The other was the bridge. It's what I've been able to find out so far is I believe when this was first built, it was simply a suspension bridge. And then at a later date, and again, I've not been able to confirm this, but at a later date, they actually built a vehicle bridge. So you could get to Emory by the railroad or by this bridge here, which connected to the all-weather highway, which is directly behind us right now. Now this too would be washed out in the 1937 flood, but it was quickly rebuilt. And some version of it lasted until 1997. Now in 1997 it was simply a pedestrian bridge or a suspension bridge. But in 1997, the 100-year flood, that took that out as well. And here's what we have now. If somebody's putting it to good use, I suspect there's a little mining operation going on over there based on this and also the other structures we've seen over there. There's a lot of mining going on in the canyon still to this day. Well, hopefully the sun isn't totally blowing our screen out, but this is the Ferguson Slide. And this first happened in 2006, basically shutting down 140, and it's been down ever since. And they've started clearing a whole lot of rock. They've been clearing a lot of rock for a long period of time. And they're going to start building a tunnel any time now. They're supposed to start building at the end of this year. So that should start at any moment. And by 2027, we're supposed to have what they're calling a rock tunnel, about 700 feet in length. Looking forward to that. So this is a cool little spot. Check out this park. We're right along Highway 140. And behind us here, let me show you that. Up on the hillside, let me get it lined up. Let me find it for you. Yeah, right up here. Straight up the hill there. That is Incline. Or should we call it, that is second incline. Okay, so what I've been reading is, there were two incline railroads. The first operated up near El Portal from 1912 until 1923. The second operated here at what would be called Incline from 1924 until, I want to say 1942. Let me check that date though. Don't quote me on that. Now the first incline would become known as the steepest logging incline in the world. And from what I've been able to read, it's still true to this day. That is, it is the steepest incline railroad ever built. Now, incline number 2, the second incline, which again is behind us, not as steep, but actually much longer. Now, the first incline near El Portal was operated by Yosemite Lumber Company, which what would happen is by the end of the 1923 season, they ran out of forest to cut. So they shut that operation down, literally dismantled everything, brought it downstream to Incline, where we are now, and then put it back up on the mountain. Now this incline would operate for, again, from 1924 all the way through until 1942. Off and on, it changed ownership a handful of times during that time, had a few shutdowns, but at the end of the 1942 season, and again, don't quote me on that, I'm gonna double check the dates, but at the end of the 1942 season, when it shut down, it would be shut down permanently. And again, that was one of many financial blows to the YV. All right, so let's get on across over here. This is quite a drive. I was up here the other day, raining like crazy. So let's go hit it today while it's still, we still got a little bit of sunlight left. You know, I was saying once before, one of my earlier installments, that the drive along the old YV roadbed up around Tunnel 1 and Exchequer was my favorite. This might be my new one. By the way, we are on Forest Road. We've just crossed the river, or the highway we were just on is off to our left across the Merced River, and we are on the old YV roadbed. And again, we're just downstream of El Portal and upstream from Incline and Emory a little farther down. And it is early fall up here in Yosemite, and it is beautiful. Wow, it's beautiful. All right, I'm going to bring up a name here. The name is Jim Law. Jim was he worked for the Yosemite Lumber Company and for Sugar Pine Lumber Company, but also for a short period of time for the YV. And I'm seeing a Jim and Edna Law on the front of this house. And I do wonder if that is the Jim we're talking about. And I'm thinking it might be so, and here's why. Because that home is built literally like right on the river. And in fact, the back part of it is actually built up on a platform over the river. And here's why that might be significant. Curiously, this side of the house, although it's looking kind of run down, it looks totally salvageable. When you get on the other side of the river and look at it on the riverside, it's looking pretty rough. Looks like it's it may have gone through that 1937, 1950, and 1997 flood. Who knows? But it's still there. Cool little piece of history, whatever it is. Hey, check this out. So I got out here to get a photo. And look what we found. Look at that. There's an old bridge abutment. Wow, look at that. Wow. That is a cool find. All right, and the Jim Law House again, you can see that the back part of that is definitely built out over the river. And I'm looking at this, look at this building here. This is fantastic. This could easily date back to the days of the incline operation. Wow, look at that. Look at that. The history there, huh? Now that one's looking like it may have been around during the YV operations. Look at that. Oh, look at this. Oh, wow, 2 young bucks. Look at that. What's going on, buddies? Hey. What's going on, buddies? Wow, look at them. All right, I'll leave you alone, man. That is definitely part of the incline operation. Look at that. Wow. More incline concrete. Look at that. How cool is that? Wow. U.S. Post Office, Incline, California. Probably not the original. You know, if you ever get the inclination to become a photographer and YouTuber, yeah, this is kind of what your life becomes. Yeah. Oh boy. All right, so I mentioned before that the original incline was located near El Portal, which is upstream from where we are now. And then they relocated incline, and basically what they did is they dismantled everything they could, brought it downstream to this location, and then put it up on the hill. And it's tempting because right now it's not raining, but I keep getting sprinkles here. So I may or may not put up the drone, but I'm going to show you what I can show you right now. This is pretty cool. All right, now before we head to El Portal, we're going to go through Moss Canyon. Now today, this is the headquarters of the Park Service outside of the west entrance to Yosemite National Park. There's also a big water and wastewater treatment facility here. But this was what, back in the day of the operation, back in the day of the YV, I should say, this was where Yosemite built a Y, or a WYE. And this is where they could pull the trains in the direction we're going now. And they would pull the train in basically head first or engine first, and then back it around to off on our right-hand side, and basically it's a big U-turn. They'd back it around and get the train going the opposite direction, pull back towards us in the direction we're going, coming towards us, I should say, and then they would back the next 2 miles, back it into El Portal. So it was a way of basically turning the train around. So off to the left here that is the route of the main line. That's the original main line. Off in this direction over that mirror there that's what they call the tail. That was the tail of the Y. So they would pull the train in on this line, and then back in the day there was another piece of rail that went this direction. So they would pull the train in this direction, back it around that direction, and now the engine was facing us. And then they would pull the engine down the rail a little bit and then back it up the main line this direction for 2 miles all the way to El Portal. This was also known as the steepest section of the YV, with an average incline of 2 degrees. So I think typically it was 1 to 1.5 down in the lower elevations, but up here the average was 2%. And well, I shouldn't say not the average, but the steepest part of it was 2%. And right now we are going around Hogback Bend. Again, this is a 18-degree bend, and it is a full 180-degree radius. So basically it turns completely back on itself, and the canyon's off on our right. All right, and our next section here was known as Rancherita Flat. And this is a site of what would ultimately become owned by and operated by the National Lead Company. And it was basically a barite mine, if I'm saying that right, B-A-R-I-T-E, a barite mine. All right, so as the story goes, the El Portal Mining Company began operations here in 1910. I will get out and kind of walk around, but there's a lot of folks out here, and I think they get a little bit suspicious when outsiders come roaming around. So we'll just stay right here and look through the crack in my windshield. And now the original mining operations were strictly on this side of the river. So there's the YV roadbed right in front of us. The Merced River canyon is beyond that tree line. So the mining operations originally, all the way up until roughly the late 1920s, would have been behind us on the north-facing mountains. What we're looking at now, I just noticed that, look at, there's snow up there. Look at that. That is spectacular. So anyway, in the late 1920s, they started drilling mines for more barite on the south-facing mountains, which are basically right in front of us. Now what makes that really cool, and would have been a fun operation to watch, is that the ore from the south mines was carried across the Merced River Canyon, across the highway, and across the YV main line right here to that open-sided metal building that's set right here in this corner. So that would have been pretty spectacular to see. All right, so the YV needed a terminus, or a terminal point, for the eastern end of its railroad, and that was not decided right away because the national park was still kind of adjusting borders for Yosemite National Park. But once it was established, the YV was very fortunate because, remember, this is a very narrow canyon we've been driving through, but just behind us here, and we're going to go there next, there was a wide spot in the canyon. Not very long, but it was a wide spot. And it was just at the foot of Yosemite National Park's western gate. So that is where the YV established their eastern terminus that they would call El Portal, which El Portal, of course, is Spanish for the gateway, meaning, of course, the gateway to Yosemite National Park. So let's head there now and let's see what we can find. All right, so if you remember our video, installment 7, where we were at Bagby, and how in 1967, the Merced Irrigation District built the new, what some call the new exchequer, but it was ultimately called the McClure Dam to form Lake McClure. Bagby, which was once a stop on the YV, was going to be inundated, so it was going to be totally underwater. Now, fortunately for history buffs and I guess rail fans in particular, the National Park Service decided that they would come in and, using their resources, disassemble everything they could and bring it here to El Portal. So what you're looking at here is the 2 water tanks for the YV at El Portal, which again were at one time at Bagby. These things are actually quite a bit larger than what I envisioned. That is something else. So this is interesting reading here. Basically what it's saying is once passengers arrived here, they were not yet in the park, but this is as far as the railroad went. So the remaining 12 miles into the park would be accomplished using stagecoach, and later they would use motor coaches, those open air motor coaches. Now this is an original YV caboose, YV 15. All right, and right next door to our caboose, to YV 15, is the turntable from Bagby. Now this again was not, this is not entirely the original. I guess it was in such bad condition that a complete restoration was required. But if I remember correctly, the metal supports there, what they call the spiders, those are original. But look at this. And look at this, this thing was turned by hand. By hand. I should mention as well, this is the original turntable location. That hasn't moved, so what you're looking at here, this is original El Portal history. Definitely looking a little different than the in the days of the YV when this was the station at Bagby. But it's good to see it put into use, at least I think it is. I guess the main part of the structure still looks like it did. Although obviously the paint's an entirely different scheme than what was used back in the day, but nevertheless. All right, now this is the side that we see in the photos. I'll pull up some photos of this. This looks like this was the downstream or west-facing wall of the station. In fact, that little window right there on the left is where the one photo they show a dead fox hanging from the window for whatever reason. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. All right, we've made it to basically adjacent to where the train shed would have been. But right here, there's a little storage shed. I don't know if you can read that here in the upper right-hand corner. Speeder M16. So this was actually used on the YV. Wow, that is a cool, man, these things are smaller than I realized. Look at that. That is something else. Still sitting on the YV rails. Ah, it's amazing. All right, so we're standing where the old metal train shed would have once been located. Basically right there at that gas station. And behind here is where all the vehicles would have pulled in. Well, originally the horse-drawn stages, and then of course the open-air motorized cars after that. But right here, hard to visualize that now. There's not really a good before and after photo, I don't believe. All right, so I'm sitting here and I'm looking through my broken windshield, and I gotta be honest, it's pretty disappointing how little remains of where the old station and shed once were located. I mean, there's nothing here. Now, where I was just at, looking at that little speeder, and that old fire engine and all that was, and behind that the gas station there, and that sheltered area right in front of us. Kind of cool little piece of history. But this is it, folks. This is where the El Portal station and train station or train shed were. Not much here now. All right, one final look at the back of Jim Law's residence. And again, you can see how this is built over the river. That's a shame, man. That would be a beautiful place to restore, if it can even be restored at this point. But what a piece of history, and looking at it, I fear that, like so many pieces of history, it's probably not much longer for this world. But there it is, folks.